Games Workshop have confirmed that the first 9 armies of Warhammer 40k will all be getting new miniatures when their codex is released, so let's talk through the ranks of some heroes and villains of Warhammer 40k and what they're most likely to receive. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk through the first 9 codex releases of Warhammer 40k, go through each of them in turn, and talk through what are the most likely options that Games Workshop might release for them when their release comes around. In 10th edition so far, the vast majority of the focus has been on the Space Marines and the Tyranids. They were the factions that got all their goodies in the Leviathan box, and then they're also getting a whole clutch of miniatures after that when their codexes come out in autumn. After that though, Games Workshop has given us perhaps a surprisingly generous codex roadmap. After the Space Marines and Tyranids, we've got Admech and Necrons. They're both releasing in winter, and then in spring 24 we've got Dark Angels, Orks, Custodes, Tau Empire and Chaos Space Marines on the cards. And when they gave us the roadmap, they did confirm that literally every single one of these would get at least one miniature release alongside the codex, whether it was an updated sculpt or something completely new. Just looking at the initial codex list, it does strike me that this is kind of slanted towards some of the most popular armies in Warhammer 40k. Seems like this time around maybe they're trying to please the most amount of people with an early codex release. Out of the most played factions, the only one that seems to be conspicuously absent are the Imperial Guard. But out of this list, besides perhaps the Admech, these are perhaps some of the other most collective factions in Warhammer 40k at the moment. Just in my general sense of how many people I see in the community and what sort of responses I get to videos for those factions. Seems that at least a good chunk of people out there will get their codex and a new miniature at least fairly early on in 10th edition, and I'm sure they'll be chugging through the rest of them after that. In any case, let's jump through each of them, talk about the things that the armies most need, and perhaps the things that they're most likely to get from Games Workshop when their books do appear. First up, starting with the obvious, we've got the Tyranids. They had their massive model reveal at least fairly recently when they just nosed ahead in that Ogram campaign. As basically the title antagonist faction of 10th edition, they've had a massive amount of kits redone. We've already seen all the main things from Leviathan, but as per that preview, we're also getting the Norn Emissary and Assimilator, resculpted Hormagaunts and Gene Stealers, Termagants with those new added in special weapons into the unit, new Lictors and Death Leaper to lead them into infiltrating into the enemy army, the Mind Control Disruption Neurolictors, and the updated sculpts for the Biovore and Pyrovores. They were sorely needing a rescue from Finecast. I guess alongside these they'd need to re-release some of the stuff from Leviathan as well that's not in the starter sets, namely the Neurotyrant, Neurogaunts and Screamer Killer Carnifex. Hopefully they managed to release those in individual kits. A few times from the starter sets in the past they've had some sort of weird combined offering, which I guess might not be terrible, but I feel like for the most part it often means that you're lumbered with extra models you might not necessarily want. In any case, between that and the Leviathan miniatures, that's a massive haul of kits redone for the Tyranids. I guess it's not impossible that might be a little bit more than this, but my guess is that that's probably the vast majority of the Tyranid releases fully revealed now, though there might be a few more peripheral things potentially. I guess it's not impossible that we might see an actual combat patrol box for them. They have got their offering that you can make from the starter sets, but I think there's at least a chance they might see their own unique one. We did have one for Space Marines and Necrons crop up later, halfway throughout 9th edition, but I'd probably put that as less likely as opposed to more likely. Otherwise, if I had to guess, one other model that we might see at some point in the future was the possibility of the return of Shrikes. Quite a lot of people were speculating that we might see those after we saw the Winged Prime, so he's got something appropriate to lead into battle. Seems a bit weird him having to walk alongside warriors, or only be able to lead a swarm of lesser beasts in the Gargoyles. I think there's at least a reasonable chance that we see them at some point in a future release for the Tyranids. It could either be soon or years from now. Otherwise, for the near future stuff, we've also got the Space Marines. We've talked about this a couple of times on the channel already, but there do seem a lot of things that seem like they're almost certain options to come out for them. A few things that seem very, very likely, though of course there's all manner of flavours of Primaris Marines and vehicles that Games Workshop could dream up if they wanted to. From the Leviathan box, we're almost certainly going to be getting multi-part Terminators and Stern Guard at the very, very minimum. They've got a bunch of war gear options that aren't reflected in the Leviathan kit, and for the same reason it sounds like the Terminator Captain is kind of odds on for that as well. He's got options like lightning claws and shields and things. I feel like a full multi-part plastic kit would be really quite fun for him to give him a bunch of war gear choices. Otherwise, beyond that, I feel a little bit less certain are the Infernus Marines and the Ballistus Dreadnought. I still say there's a very good chance they get their own box sets with more posable miniatures and maybe different war gear options. It happened for the Assault Intercessors in 9th edition, so it seems at least reasonable that the Infernus Marines might get it for them. Plus the Ballistus Dreadnought has the option to actually have some genuine alternative armament, maybe some autocannons or some big melter or something like that. Otherwise, given that a whole bunch of the Firstborn kits have had their ranges rotated, Assault Marines and Scouts moving to Primaris or bigger sculpts would be kind of a straightforward one. Jump Assault Primaris has been one of the most requested things for a really long time now, and it definitely seemed conspicuous that they pulled that kit but not the Devastators and Tactical Marines that were released around about the same time. Scouts redone in a similar style to Black Templar Neophytes seems likely. I'd say beyond that, probably the other most odds-on things are updates for a few other peripheral Terminator things. The Terminator Chaplain would make sense alongside the Captain and Librarian, and also the Terminator Assault Squad would also make sense to redo at the same time as well. I think it'd just be a bit weird if Games Workshop have the Thunderhammer and Lightning Claw Terminators being massively smaller stature than their brothers with the Power Fists and Stormbolters. Otherwise, they could still absolutely go mad with all sorts of other Primaris tanks, infantry and vehicles. Wouldn't be impossible to have some surprises alongside the more expected stuff. They could certainly go down the route of near equivalents for other Firstborn units that they've not got to yet. Maybe things like the Vindicator or Whirlwind might be some choices. In any case, hopefully the wait for the reveal isn't too long yet. It looks like the rest of the Space Marine range is probably going to be the next big miniature reveal for 10th edition 40k. Moving on beyond the two big launch factions, we've got the Necrons and the Admech. The Necrons had their massive range revamp, similar to what the Tyranids are getting now back in 9th edition, and Games Workshop kind of declared war on anything that had green rods in the range, though there were a few survivors from their Silver Harvest, the Locust Destroyers, the Locust Lord, and the regular Lord on foot being perhaps the most obvious. Seems like these guys would be odds on to get redone at some stage, particularly the Locust Destroyers in a similar sort of style to the Locust Heavies. Seems like any or all of those three could be a really nice small release for the Necrons. Otherwise, Necrons have a perhaps surprisingly good cast of special characters back from the Finecast era, most of which could do with a resculpt at some stage. Perhaps a couple of the most prominent ones might be Imatech the Stormlord or Trazyn the Infinite. Trazyn in particular I think gives himself a better chance as a bit of a fan favourite, meddling around in all sorts of other narratives and grabbing things for his collection. I have a feeling that at some point some of these guys might start to follow some of the Space Marine characters into Finecast Oblivion if they're not redone. I would be kind of surprised if Games Workshop updates the entire lot of them in one fell swoop though. Also in winter is the Adeptus Mechanicus, perhaps one of the least obvious ones for where they might go next, with a slightly more recent army that actually has had a fair few of their main force organisation slots filled quite well. Not sure if they'll do another major release for the Adeptus Mechanicus, they haven't really done too badly in recent years. I wouldn't be too surprised if it was just something disappointing like a minor character release or something. Besides Call, they don't really have any other major named character tech priests yet in their core range. That definitely could be one thing that they go for. Otherwise though, really quite a lot of options for how they could expand the army. They could add some more automata type variations, similar to the Castellan robots. That's often been a fairly popular fan request to have the 30k stuff ported into 40k, but it never happened in the end, and now it looks like that probably won't ever happen given that they legends most of the other 30k stuff. I suppose plastic releases for things like the Terrax pattern termite drill could be interesting. That thing definitely had its own flavour and was kind of fun. Still playable with Legends rules of course, or maybe some simple melee variant Skitarii similar to the now Legends Titan Guard units. I know you've got things like Rust Stalkers and Electro Priests, but perhaps just some rank and file Skitarii with something like some spears and shields could be quite fun. Unless they do just go for something simple and basic with carrots type things though, they really could go for all manner of creations. You could get some high-tech artillery type guns like a scaled down Ordinatus maybe. That's the enormous great big Forge World gun tractor thing. And just for battlefield roles, they don't have either a fortification or Titanic unit yet, though I'd guess those sort of things would probably usually come with a fairly major release for the army. Let me know what you think the Admech might get though. Games Workshop definitely seem to be happy to go quite weird following things like the Cerberus and Taraxia releases. GW seem to be pretty happy with curveball technology for the Skitarii. Moving into the spring codex releases, and I feel like perhaps one of the most anticipated might be the Dark Angels codex. Their Primarch and Azrael got redone earlier this year. I think that given the return of their Primarch, there's really quite a strong chance that the Dark Angels are the next lucky chapter to receive a Black Templar style range refresh, a whole load of their firstborn units making the transition to Primaris form with new scaling and perhaps some reimagined designs. Previously, without Primaris scale Terminators, I feel like Games Workshop couldn't really have done this, but now they do have actual generic Terminators out in the wild at Primaris scale. They now do have the scope to make some unique and fancy ones for the Dark Angels, and release some proper upscaled and updated Deathwing if they want to. If they do go the whole hog and update them, I'd guess that we'd see something similar to the Black Templars, who actually got a fair amount of kit releases given that they're quite a small faction. Multiple resculpted characters seem on the cards. Ezekiel, Asmodai, Belial and Samael probably are the top contenders there, plus the possibility for some more generic ones as well, maybe an Interrogator Chaplain and Company Master kits, they could be two of the best ones if they wanted to do that. Otherwise, at least as a bare minimum, I'd hope for something like some robed Primaris Marines, going back to the classic Dark Angels robed veteran look that doesn't really get realised very well by their Intercessor upgrade sprue in my opinion. Something for the Deathwing, almost certainly some upscale Terminators, and then something for the Raven Wing, probably some sort of fancy Outrider bike variants redone in the Raven Wing style. An updated Black Knight or Command Squad kit seems like the most likely thing there. The Black Templar's also got a rather good upgrade sprue as well. I feel like that would be a very nice one for the Dark Angels to mirror. Maybe a few bits to customise things like Storm Speeders could be kind of good on that. And if we do see those kind of releases, then probably it would mean a new combat patrol to go alongside it as well. Ideally with some robed Space Marines at its heart. Maybe a little bit of a wish list there. I feel like we'll see most of this stuff happen at some point. If they do follow the Black Templars example, then it might well all be pretty much at once. I feel like the Return of the Lion has to put them as odds on the best chapter that's most likely to receive this update in 10th, though we might get more like some follow-on Blood Angels perhaps. Otherwise for the spring releases we've also got the Orks. For the greenskins, the Tank Busters really stick out like a sore thumb as the single unit that most desperately needs an update in their entire range, being lumbered with an ancient Finecast kit with locked weapons, which now means that their datasheet means they can't even field an entire squad of rockets if they want to. It'd be really cool to see something halfway to as good as the Commandos got for a kit of their own. Otherwise, plenty of character updates they could potentially choose. Captain Badruk, Mad Dog Grotsnig, and Boss Zagstruk out of the recent range, and previous miniatures that never got an actual plastic or Finecast release, like Old Zog Wart or Wozdacker Gutsmech, which could be kind of fun as a dual kit between a Warboss on a bike. Maybe that's a little bit less likely though, given that we've got the Deathkiller Wartrike now. I'd be kind of surprised if the Orks got any sort of enormous release, given that they got quite a nice haul in 9th edition with their Beast Snaggers, Deathcopters and updated boys. Again, they're an army that's got basically endless possibilities for scrap contraptions or more stuff from their Squig Beasts. I feel like if they were to add another vehicle to the line, then maybe something like a simple looted tank is one of the things that Orks basically always use in the lore, but have never really had an official model to represent it, and Games Workshop usually pull things and rules that don't have an official model. A proper looted tank kit of some sort could be kind of fun, though that's probably a bit unlikely and a bit of a pipe dream. The Adeptus Custodes are another spring codex release. They've got a tiny range, so all sorts of ways they could go with those. Probably the most easy and sensible though would just be to port a whole bunch of the Forged World resin range into plastic, maybe similar to how they've done with Heresy era things, but this time actually make them a core part of the Custodes range and don't just immediately send them to Legends. At the moment the Games Workshop plastic line for the Custodes really feels like an absolute bare bones army. Adding in all the Forged World options makes them feel like a lot more of a well-rounded force. There's the Caladius and Coronas Grav tanks, the Little Palace Grav attack, 3 unique Dreadnoughts and their unique jump infantry and ranged foot custodians. Access to all of those really rounds out the army. It'd be quite nice if a few of those could be made into plastic so they weren't charged at Forge World expensive resin prices. There's definitely a lot of scope for expanding the other talent of the Emperor as well, the Sisters of Silence. They've only really got 1.5 kits in their range now between Alea and their Sisters squad. You could definitely add other variants for them. In Heresy I believe they had their own unique transport as well. And it looked like with some printed out rules from the Horus Heresy they get quite a big expansion to their range at some stage. Though what makes it to Warhammer 40k might be another question, probably less likely if it's any Forge World resin stuff. Custodes really are quite popular as a faction at the moment, for how easy it is to jump into them. Seems kind of inevitable that they do another major release for them for some point. It's more of a matter of when than if. Then we've got the Chaos Space Marines, who again got a reasonable update to their range in 9th edition. New Chosen, Possessed and Cultists among others. Out of kits that they probably most need an update for, the Chaos Bikers perhaps stand out first and foremost. They were quite heavily rumoured that they were coming in the previous model release for them, but then they didn't show up when the Codex came around. Seems at least fairly likely, based on all the other rumours that turned out to be accurate, that their models probably do exist, but they might just have been kept back for the next release. So I think that there's at least a reasonable chance that they do show up this time around. Besides a few of the vehicles, they're perhaps one of the oldest mainline plastic kits in their army's core range. They've needed an update for really quite a while, and I'm sure that a heretical biker gang redone with a bit more motion like the Primaris Outriders would look very cool indeed. Otherwise, for characters, perhaps Huron Blackheart stands out as a model that needs a resculpt. Would be a shame to lose him as an iconic character from 40k, and he has been at least fairly present in the lore and fluff as well. I'd be kind of surprised if he went away anytime too soon. I'd guess that we're probably unlikely to see a generic jump pack lord now that we've got Harken World Claimer, but that would be quite a nice one for the fans I think, given how disappointed a lot of people were when he went away. And I think quite a lot of people would quite like to see a unique character choice per legion as well, kind of similar to what the Space Marines get. Though I wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop weren't the most keen on that themselves. It seemed like the individual Codex chapter character choices like Kayvon Shrike and Torgaradon and things didn't really sell enormously well when they came out, at least not compared with how many they produced of them. Not sure if that might be something that makes Games Workshop less likely to make unique characters for the Chaos Legions. Otherwise, perhaps the other models that really stand out as in need of an update are the Noise Marines and Lucius from the Emperor's Children. I feel like they're unlikely to come with a Chaos Space Marine Codex update though. Similar to Khorne Berserkers, I'd be surprised if we get an updated Noise Marine kit before the actual Emperor's Children Codex winds up coming out. It's possible it could be in 10th edition, though I'd guess towards the end if so. I feel like it's probably likely by the time that 11th edition is finished though. Finally, for the Spring Codex releases, we've also got Codex Tau Empire as well. The Tau are kind of interesting in that they've got really quite an old range of miniatures for a fair few of them, though most of them tend to hold up at least fairly well, I'd say. Maybe the things that might be most in need of an update are the Vespid, the Firesight team, perhaps just regular Kroot mercenaries, unless they just use the Farstalker kin bands for the models for the regular Kroot squad going forward, and maybe the unique Ethereals, Ornvar and Ornshi, if they continue to support them. I believe that Ornvar is fluff dead now. They do have quite a lot of older models in their range, things like the Hammerhead, Skyray and Stealth suits. I feel like the bigger tanks hold up kind of fine, and I wouldn't really see what they'd do with them that's too major. Reimagined stealth suits could be kind of interesting though. The older kit is maybe just a little bit basic for them. Otherwise, they could certainly make some more variants on the Riptide chassis. The Forge World ones of those are fairly popular with the Avara and the Ravana. Or they could revisit some of the bigger Kroot again, things like Narlox. In general, I don't think they were one of the most super popular rangers from Forge World though, just a bit of a niche faction really, and I believe that was a factor in them getting dropped from their line. In any case, let me know what you'd like to see from the Tau Empire when they do get their codex and next miniature release. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed just a little bit of speculation and some of the more logical picks for miniature updates that Games Workshop might take for the armies that are coming out. Please let me know what you'd like to see for these factions down in the comments below, and which ones you think are most likely for Games Workshop to come out with them when their codexes do come around. What are your hopes or fears for your own individual factions? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.